The richest man in the city sat in the back of his own car and could not say what he wanted. He had bought 3 companies that year. He had outbid 2 governments for a stretch of coastline. He had a number attached to his name that people repeated like a rumor, $4.1 billion. And he could not, sitting in the leather quiet of that car, name one thing he actually wanted that he did not already own. So he made his driver an offer. Instead, 24 hours, ask for anything. A house, a sum, a debt erased, a name on a building, and it was yours. The man behind the wheel did not answer right away, and what he eventually asked for was the only thing in the whole arrangement that money could not simply hand over. You will want to know what that was. Stay with the story, because the answer is not what the offer was built to expect. His name was Andre Boone, and he had driven for Walter for 9 years. 9 years of dark suits and early mornings, of idling outside restaurants while other men ate, of memorizing which exits a building had and which ones were quiet. He was 51 years old. He was a wide, calm man, heavy in the shoulders, slow to anger, with a close grey beard and hands that had done other kinds of work before they learned to hold a wheel for 10 hours without complaint. He wore the same black suit Walter's company issued, and under it, on a cord, a thin brass key that opened nothing anymore. The lock it belonged to had been changed years ago. He kept the key the way some men keep a photograph. Walter Crane was 63 and tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. He had built a logistics empire out of one leased truck and a refusal to be told no. He had a wife once and a daughter, and an apartment that smelled like cooking on Sundays, and somewhere along the climb he had set those things down to free his hands, and when he reached the top and turned around, they were not behind him anymore. His wife had died of a quiet illness while he was closing a deal in another country. His daughter had stopped taking his calls. He lived now in a glass house above the river with a staff of 11 and a silence he could not fire. The offer came on a Tuesday in November, in traffic, in the rain. Walter had spent the morning in a board meeting where 40 people agreed with everything he said, and he had come out of it feeling like a man shouting into a closet. He climbed into the back of the car. Andre pulled into the slow river of brake lights on the bridge. The wipers kept their patient time. And Walter, watching the back of his driver's grey head, said a thing he had not planned to say. "Andre, if I gave you 24 hours and told you to ask me for anything you wanted, anything at all, what would you ask for?" Andre did not look away from the road. "That a real question, Mr. Crane, or are you thinking out loud?" "It's real. I mean it. A house, money, whatever you've been carrying that I could lift. You've driven me 9 years, and I've never once asked what you needed." Walter's voice had something raw under the smoothness. "Tell me what you want. You have until tomorrow this time. Then it's done. I'll make it happen before you finish asking." The car moved forward 6 feet and stopped. Rain ran down the glass in long seams. Andre was quiet for almost a full minute, and Walter let him be quiet because he had learned over 9 years that this particular silence was the man thinking and not the man refusing. "I'll need the night to answer right," Andre said finally. "A thing like that, you don't want to answer it fast. You answer it fast, you ask for the wrong thing." "Take the night," Walter said. And something in him, for the first time in a long time, felt like it was leaning toward another person instead of away. What Walter did not know was that Andre already knew exactly what he was going to ask for. He had known for 6 years. He had just never imagined he would be allowed to say it out loud. To understand the answer, you have to go back. 6 years before that rainy Tuesday, on an ordinary Thursday. Andre had been driving Walter home from the airport when his own phone rang in his pocket. He never answered the phone while driving Walter. It was the first rule, the rule under all the other rules. The screen, though, said the name of his sister, and his sister did not call at 4 in the afternoon unless something had broken, so he glanced at it at a red light and his face changed, and Walter saw it change in the mirror. "Pull over," Walter had said. "Sir, I can get you home. It's only—" "Pull over, Andre. Answer it." So he had pulled to the curb and answered, and Walter had watched a large, steady man fold quietly in the front seat as he listened. When the call ended, Andre sat with both hands on the wheel and did not start the car. "My daughter," Andre said. "She's in the hospital. They don't. They're not sure she's going to." He stopped. He was not a man who let words like that out into a car where his employer could hear them. "I'm sorry, I'll take you home and I'll arrange a replacement for the rest of the—" "You'll do nothing of the kind," Walter said. "Drive to the hospital, not mine, yours. Right now." Her name was Renee. She was 22 then, Andre's only child, and she had collapsed at the community college where she was studying to be a nurse. A vessel in her brain had failed in a way the doctors named with a long, cold word. She needed a surgery that the city's public hospital could schedule in 11 days, and the surgeon at the public hospital was good, but overworked, and 11 days was a long time for a thing that was bleeding. Now there was another option. A private neurological center across the river, a surgeon there who could take her that night, who had the equipment and the empty operating room and the steady, famous hands. The cost of that was a number Andre could not even hold in his mind. He made $41,000 a year. The surgery, the room, the days after came to something north of $200,000. He had $11,000 in savings and a brass key that opened nothing, and a daughter bleeding inside her own skull. He did not ask Walter for anything. That is the part that matters. He did not turn around in that hospital waiting room and beg the richest man he knew for help. It was not in him. He had been raised by a mother who would have walked into the river before she asked a rich man for $1, and the lesson had set in his bones like a second skeleton. He sat in a plastic chair under a buzzing light, and he prayed in the plain way his mother had taught him, not for money, just for his girl to wake up, and he prepared himself to take the 11 days and pray. They were enough. The waiting room had a vending machine that hummed, and a television bolted high in the corner, playing a cooking show with the sound off. A woman across from him slept, sitting up with a coat over her like a blanket. Andre held his phone in both hands and did not call anyone because the only person he would have called was his mother, and she had been gone 4 years. He turned the brass key over and over on its cord with his thumb. He thought about Renee at 6 years old in the back of a borrowed car, asking him why the moon followed them home. He thought about Renee at 16 telling him she wanted to be a nurse so she could be the person in the room when somebody was scared. He thought that the world had a cruelty in it that would let a girl who wanted to comfort the frightened end up frightened and alone in a bed with a long cold word written on her chart. He did the only thing left to a man with empty hands. He bowed his head over the dead key and he asked plainly for more time than the 11 days could give him. Walter had stood in the doorway of that waiting room and watched him for a while. He saw a large man, made small by a thing money could not touch, and he recognized it because he had been made that same small size in a hospital corridor years before, while a different machine kept a different kind of time beside his own wife, and no amount of money in the account had bought him a single extra morning with her. Then Walter had gone out into the hall and made 3 phone calls. He did not announce them. He did not come back and lay them at Andre's feet. He simply made them, in the low even voice he used to move mountains, and then he came back and sat down 2 chairs away from his driver and waited with him in silence, 2 men under a buzzing light, and said nothing about what he had just done. Andre never knew about the calls. By the time the surgeon came out to find the family, the paperwork was already handled, the room was already paid, the famous steady hands were already scrubbing in. When Andre tried to understand what was happening, the hospital administrator only said that the account had been settled by a private party who had asked to remain unnamed and that he should go be with his daughter. Andre assumed it was a charity, a fund, some mercy with no face. He did not connect it to the tired man who had told him to pull over because that man had never said a word about it, then or ever. Renee woke up. Renee lived. Renee finished nursing school 2 years later and now worked the night shift in a cardiac ward, 30 years old, alive, with a small scar at her hairline she covered with a sweep of hair and never thought about. She did not know either. She thought a stranger's kindness had saved her. In a way it had. She just did not know. The stranger sat in the front seat of a car 5 days a week with a brass key around his neck. Andre found out by accident 2 years after the surgery. He had been cleaning the car. The deep Sunday cleaning Walter never asked for, but Andre did anyway, and he had pulled the back seat forward to reach a coin that had rolled under it, and his hand had closed on a folded sheet of paper that had slipped down into the seam of the leather and been forgotten. It was a printout. A wire transfer confirmation from a private account to a neurological center across the river, dated the Thursday his daughter collapsed, in the amount of $214,000, with a memo line that said only, "For the driver's girl." No name on it. Andre had sat in that car in the closed garage for an hour, holding the paper. The garage was cold and smelled of concrete and motor oil and the faint pine of the air. Freshener he kept in the door pocket. A single fluorescent tube ticked overhead. Andre sat in the driver's seat with the folded printout open on the wheel in front of him and read the memo line again and again. For the driver's girl, 4 words a man had typed, and then made sure no one would ever trace back to him. His hands, which did not shake on a wet bridge at night with a billionaire asleep in the back, shook. Now, he read the date, he read the amount, $214,000. He thought about the 11,000 he had had in savings, and the 11 days the public hospital had quoted him, and he understood that somewhere in that buzzing waiting room, while he bowed his head over a dead key and asked for time, a man 2 chairs away had already bought him the time, and had then sat down beside him and let him keep his dignity by never letting him know. He understood then all of it. The pull over, the drive to the right hospital, the administrator's careful words about a party who wished to remain unnamed. He understood that the silence around the gift had not been an accident, that Walter had paid $200,000 to save a girl he had met twice and had then made sure the girl's father would never have to carry the weight of being indebted. Walter had given him his daughter's life and had taken nothing, not even the thank you, because the thank you would have made it a transaction and Walter had wanted it to be a gift. And here was the thing Andre could not get past sitting in that garage. A man who would do that quietly and then sit alone in a glass house every night with no one to eat with. Andre knew the shape of Walter's loneliness because he drove him through it 5 days a week. He took him to the office where 40 people agreed with him. He took him past the school his estranged daughter's children attended, slowing without being asked every single time, while Walter looked out the window at kids he was not allowed to know. He took him home to the silence. Andre had spent 9 years watching the richest man in the city be the poorest man he personally knew, and now he held in his hands the proof that this same man had emptied $250,000 to save a stranger and had hidden his own hand so the stranger would not feel small. Andre put the paper back exactly where he found it. He never told Walter he had seen it. From that day, though, a thing took root in him, and the thing was this. If he ever, somehow, against all the odds of his life, got the chance to give Walter one thing back, it would not be a thing money could buy. It would be the only thing the man was actually starving for. He would find a way to put a person back at that table. He did not know how. He was a driver. He had no leverage over a billionaire's broken family. So he carried the wish the way he carried the key, a weight with no lock, and he waited. And he did not really believe that day would come. Then a tired man in the back of a car on a rainy Tuesday told him to ask for anything. That night, Andre did not sleep. He sat at his own small kitchen table in the apartment. He shared with no one since Renee had moved out. And he turned the offer over and over. He could ask for the house. He could ask for the money, enough to never drive again, enough to fix every leaking thing in his life and his sister's life too. A man would be a fool not to. 24 hours, anything you want from a man worth $4 billion. His mother's voice was in his ear, the old voice that said you do not ask rich men for anything, and for the first time in his life he argued back with it, quietly, in the dark, because he was not going to ask for himself. He had figured that out the moment Walter said the word anything. He was going to spend the single wish of his lifetime on the man giving it. And to do that right, he was going to have to do something that scared him more than poverty ever had. He was going to have to call Renee, not for himself, for what she could do. Because his daughter, the night nurse, the girl Walter had saved without ever being thanked, was the bridge he had been missing for 6 years, and he had never let himself see it until the offer made it necessary. Rene worked nights in a cardiac ward, and in that cardiac ward, 3 floors up, in a private room that the hospital staff spoke about in lowered voices, was a 61-year-old woman recovering from a heart procedure, a woman named Diane. Walter's estranged wife was dead, his estranged daughter was not. And his daughter's name was Diane, and 4 months ago Diane's own heart had faltered, and she had been admitted to the very ward where, by an accident that Andre would spend the rest of his life calling something other than accident, Rene Boone held a clipboard and learned a frightened woman's first name. Wait, let me say that more plainly, because the threads are pulling together now, and you should feel them tighten. For 6 years, Andre had wanted to give Walter back his daughter. He had no way to reach her. And for the last 4 months, without anyone planning it, his own daughter had been the nurse caring for Walter's daughter on the night shift, and neither of them had known what they were sitting on top of, because Diane went by her mother's maiden name and had spent 20 years making sure nobody connected her to the famous father she would not speak to. Andre had only learned the connection 3 weeks earlier when Rene, exhausted after a shift, had mentioned a patient over coffee. A sad woman, she said, heart's mending fine, but she's the loneliest patient on the floor. Husband passed, daughter she barely sees, and she had a falling out with her own father years back, some big deal businessman she won't even name. You can tell, it eats her up. Rene had shaken her head over her cup. Money everywhere in that family, and not one of them at her bedside. And Andre had gone very still, the way he had gone still in the garage, because he drove a big-deal businessman past a school every week to look at grandchildren. He was not allowed to know, and the math of it had walked up his spine one cold step at a time. He had not said anything to Rene then, he had needed to be sure. So over the next 3 weeks he had been sure in the small, careful ways a watchful man can be sure. A first name, an age. A maiden name he caught once on an envelope on Walter's desk, the same name, Rene's lonely patient, was admitted under the dates lining up. The daughter who would not speak to her father. He had done it the way he did everything, slowly and without fuss. On a Monday he had carried a box of files up to Walter's home study and seen, in the tray on the desk, an envelope addressed in Walter's own hand to a woman with a maiden name, returned unopened, the kind of letter a proud man writes and a prouder daughter sends back. He had memorized the name and said nothing. On a Wednesday he had asked Rene, light as anything over the phone, what her sad patient's first name was, just so he could pray for her by name, he said, and Rene had told him, Diane, and had been touched that her father would pray for a stranger. On a Thursday, driving Walter the long way past the school, he had watched the old man's eyes follow 2 children across a playground, a boy and a girl, and had thought, those are her children, those are the grandchildren, and the certainty had settled into him cold and final. He checked it against the calendar. He checked the age. 61. He checked the falling out. 20 years back, a businessman she would not name. Every road he drove down led to the same place. By the night of the rainy Tuesday, Andre Boone knew something. That Walter, with all his money, did not. He knew where Walter's daughter was. He knew she was 4 months out from her own heart scare and frightened and alone and quietly aching for the very reconciliation her pride would not let her reach for. And he knew that his own daughter held the door. So when Walter said, ask for anything, the wish had a shape at last. You do not put a shattered family back together by spending a wish like a coin. Andre understood that too, sitting at his kitchen table at 2 in the morning. He could not simply say, Mr. Crane, I want you to reconcile with your daughter. Here is her room number. Go. A man's grief is not a vending machine. If he handled it wrong, he could break the one fragile thread for good. Could send Walter charging into that hospital room like a deal he meant to close. Could humiliate a proud daughter into running further than she had ever run. He had one move. He had to make it gently, and he had to make it true, and he could not do it alone. He picked up the phone at 2 in the morning, and he called his daughter. And when her tired voice answered, he said, Baby, I need you to tell me everything about your lonely patient, and then I need you to do something for me that's going to sound strange, and you're going to have to trust your old man. The next morning, Andre did not drive Walter to the office. He drove him to the hospital instead, and Walter, who had a 9 o'clock he had already half forgotten, watched the route go wrong and said nothing for a while, because over 9 years he had learned that when Andre took a strange road, there was usually a reason waiting at the end of it. They pulled into a parking structure that was not on any of Walter's calendars. Andre put the car in park, then he turned all the way around in his seat, something he had never once done in 9 years, and he looked his employer in the eye. "You told me to ask you for anything," Andre said. "I've got my answer, but before I ask, I need to tell you a story, and I need you to let me finish it before you say a word. Can you do that for me, Mr. Crane?" Walter looked at the big, serious man who had driven him in silence for nearly a decade and had never asked him for one thing, and he said, "Go ahead." So Andre told him. He told him about the Thursday his daughter collapsed. He watched Walter's face, and he saw the exact moment Walter realized which story this was. And he saw Walter open his mouth to wave it off the way he had waved it off for 6 years. And Andre said gently, "You said, let me finish." Walter closed his mouth. Andre told him about the folded paper in the seam of the seat, the wire transfer, the memo line with no name on it, for the driver's girl. He told Walter that he had known for 6 years exactly who had saved Renee, and had never said thank you, because he understood that being thanked was the one thing Walter had paid all that money to avoid. He watched the billionaire's eyes go wet and watched him fight it. This man who agreed with by 40 people, this man alone in a glass house, and Andre kept his own voice steady and low, the voice he used on a hard road in the rain. "You gave me my daughter back," Andre said, "and you made sure I'd never have to feel like I owed you for her. I have carried that for 6 years. Mr. Crane and I have prayed for one chance to give you something back, not money. You've got money. The thing you're missing, money never once touched it. I've driven you past it every week and watched you look at it through a car window." Walter's voice came out cracked. "Andre, what are you?" "My daughter's, nurse," Andre said. "Night shift. Cardiac ward across the river. 4 months ago, they admitted a woman to her floor. Heart trouble. She's mending fine. But she's the loneliest patient up there, my girl," says a widow. "A daughter she hardly sees, and a falling out, years back, with her own father, some big businessman she won't even name." Andre let that sit 1 heartbeat. "She was admitted under her mother's maiden name, the same name I saw on an envelope on your desk. She's 61 years old, Mr. Crane. Her first name is Diane." The rain had stopped sometime in the night. The parking structure was very quiet. Walter sat in the back of his own car and made a sound that a man makes maybe once in his life. "She's here," he whispered. "She's been here 4 months. 3 floors up," Andre said. "And she doesn't know I know who she is. And she doesn't know you're in this car. My Renee is up there right now, finishing her shift. She's been her nurse for 4 months, and 3 weeks ago she told me about her sad, lonely patient, and I have spent every day since making sure before I ever said a word to you, because I was not going to hand you a hope and have it be the wrong woman." He took a breath. "It's her, I'm sure. So here's what I'm asking for. That's my anything. I don't want the house or the money. I want you to go upstairs, that's all. I'm not asking you to fix it in one morning. I'm asking you to walk into that room before she's discharged and gone again, and to let her see that her father came. Whatever happens after that is hers and yours. But you don't get this twice. She's 3 floors up and the door is open, and I am asking you, with the one wish you gave me, to walk through it." For a long moment, Walter did not move. Then this man worth $4 billion, who had not wept at his own wife's funeral because he had been too numb to find the tears, put his face in his hands in the back of a parked car and cried like something breaking loose after a long winter. Andre did not look away and did not rush him. He had buried his own mother. He knew that some weeping is not sadness. Some weeping is a frozen thing, finally thawing, and the kindest thing you can do is let it run. When Walter lifted his head, his eyes were red, and his voice was a wreck. He said, "What if she tells me to leave? What if it's too late? Andre, it's been 20 years. What if I walk up there and she looks at me and there's just nothing? Then you'll have walked up there, Andre said, and she'll know you came. That's not nothing, Mr. Crane. A daughter remembers who came. I've got one, I know. They went up together as far as the elevator. Andre would not go further. This was not his room to be in. He pressed the button and held the door and said, "Floors at the end of the hall. Room past the nurse's station. My Renee's the one with the locks. Tell her you're a friend of her father's. She'll know what to do. I called her last night." And then, because the big man in the suit suddenly looked 63 and afraid in a way no board meeting had ever made him, Andre put one heavy, steady hand on Walter's shoulder, the first time in 9 years he had ever touched him, and he said, "Go on. I'll be right here when you come down. I'm not going anywhere. I've got all the time in the world." The doors closed and took Walter up. Rennie Boone was at the nurse's station charting the last of her night when a tall, older man in an expensive suit came down the hall, looking lost in a way her wealthy visitors never looked. She knew him before he said a word because her father had described him on the phone at 2 in the morning. The grey hair, the careful walk, the look of a man going somewhere he was afraid of. She came around the station. "You're here for Diane," she said quietly. "I'm Renee. My dad called me." And the man's composure cracked right there at her station. And this stranger said, "She's my daughter. I haven't seen her in 20 years. I didn't know she was here. Your father," and he could not finish it. And Renee, who had loved a father her whole life and had once nearly died and been saved by a kindness with no name, felt the whole shape of it land on her at once, because she had been the lonely woman's nurse for 4 months and had never known she was nursing the other half of her own father's secret. "Come on," Renee said, and her voice was not quite steady either. "She's awake. She had a good night. Let me go in first." She went in first. Diane Crane, 61, propped against the pillows with the heart monitor keeping its patient green time beside her, looked up from the window she spent most of her days looking out of and said, "Morning, Renee," in the flat, pleasant voice of a woman who had learned to expect nothing from any given day. "Miss Diane," Renee said, "there's someone here to see you. He's been trying to find you for a long time. I want you to take it slow, all right? Your heart's doing fine and I'm right outside and there's no rush on anything." And Diane's face changed because in 4 months no one had come to see her, not once, and a person does not get a visitor out of nowhere unless something has shifted in the world, and she said, "Renee, who?" And then her father walked into the room. What happened in that room belonged to the two of them, and the story does not need to climb in through the window and watch it. Renee, though, standing in the hall with her back to the wall and her eyes closed, heard through the door a sound she would remember for the rest of her life. She heard a 61-year-old woman say one word, the word daughter, say, when they have given up on a thing and it walks in the door anyway, the word dad, cracked clean down the middle. And then she heard two people who had wasted 20 years begin clumsily, through tears, in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and mourning, to not waste any more. Andre was waiting by the elevators downstairs, exactly where he said he would be, when Renee came and found him. An hour later, on her break, she did not say anything. She just put her arms around her father, this wide, steady man who had nearly lost her once, and had spent the rescue money he was given on a stranger's reunion instead of himself, and she held on. Around his neck, under the black suit, the brass key pressed between them, the key to a door that did not exist anymore, the key he had kept all these years to remember, that some things you hold on to are not about what they opened. Walter Crane came down 2 hours later, and he was not the same man who had gone up. He found Andre by the car. The two of them stood for a moment in the grey morning light of the parking structure, the billionaire and the driver, and neither of them quite knew the etiquette of what had just happened, because there was no etiquette for it. Finally, Walter said, "She's coming to stay with me when she's discharged, just to try. We're going to try." His voice broke on the word, try. 20 years, Andre, and it took you, a man I pay, to drive a car. You're the one who... He stopped. He had run out of the kind of words he was good at. "You gave me mine first," Andre said simply. "I just gave you yours back." Walter looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "You still haven't asked me for anything for yourself. The offer was for you. You spent it on me. I spent it exactly how I wanted to spend it, Andre said. That was the whole point of it being mine to spend. And here is where a smaller story would have had the billionaire force a fortune on the driver anyway, would have made it about the money in the end, after all. Walter, though, had just learned, in a hospital room 3 floors up, what it costs to treat a person like a transaction and what it is worth to treat them like a person, so he did not write a check to even the score. Instead, he asked, "The way you ask a man whose judgment you have finally learned to trust, then will you let me do something, not because I owe you, but because I want to? Will you let me be useful to your family, the way you were just useful to mine?" It was a different thing than a payment, and both men knew it. In the months that followed, Diane moved into the glass house above the river, and the silence in it began, slowly, to fill. She and her father did not heal all at once, because 20 years does not close like a door, but they were in the same house, and they ate at the same table on Sundays, and the cooking smell came back into a home that had forgotten it. The first Sunday she cooked, she made a pot of greens the way her own mother had made them, and Walter stood in the kitchen doorway, not saying anything for a long time because it was the smell of the apartment he had walked away from 30 years before, the one that had been waiting at the bottom of all that money the whole time. Renee was invited to those Sunday tables, and she came because she had nursed Diane for 4 months, and a bond had grown there that did not end at discharge. She would arrive still tired from a night shift, and Diane would press a plate on her before she was through the door, and the two women would talk in the low, easy way of people who had met each other at their most frightened and had nothing left to hide. And Andre, who had spent 9 years driving Walter past the life he was missing now, sometimes sat at that table too, a guest in the house of the man he had once only served, and the strangeness of it wore off faster than anyone expected, because grief shared and grief mended make a short bridge between people. Walter did, in time, insist on one thing, and it was not a fortune. He paid off the small mortgage on Andre's apartment, the leaking, forgettable place Andre had lived in alone since Renee moved out, and he did it the same way he had paid for the surgery 6 years before, quietly, with no ceremony. Except this time when Andre found out, he walked straight into Walter's study, and the two of them just looked at each other and started to laugh. Because the same man had pulled the same quiet trick twice now, and there was nothing to do about a man like that but love him. Andre kept driving. People asked him why. A man whose employer had become his friend, whose daughter ate Sunday dinner in a billionaire's house, why did he still put on the black suit 5 days a week and hold the wheel for 10 hours? And Andre would only smile and say that he liked the work, which was true, and that somebody had to make sure Walter took the long way past the school on Thursdays so he could wave at the grandchildren. He was finally, slowly being allowed to know. That was true too. He still wore the brass key. One evening, near the end of that first year, idling outside a restaurant where Walter and Diane were having dinner, the two of them inside at a window table laughing about something, Andre sat in the warm quiet of the car and took the key out and held it in his palm the way he had held the folded paper in the garage years before. It opened nothing. It had opened nothing for a long time. He had kept it to remember a door that closed, his mother's door, the woman who would have walked into the river before she asked a rich man for $1. He thought she would have understood in the end what he had finally asked the rich man for. He had not asked for $1. He had asked the man to walk through a door. And the man had, and on the other side of it, a family that money had scattered, was learning how to sit at a table again. Andre closed his hand around the key and put it back under his collar against his chest, where it had always been. Inside the restaurant, a father said something to a daughter, and she laughed and put her hand over his. And Andre watched them through the glass. And for once in 9 years, the man in the car did not feel like he was watching someone else's life from the outside. He felt like he had finally been let all the way in. If you have ever been the person who came when no one else did, or the person nobody came for, you already know which one matters more in the end. Tell me in a few words who came for you, because somebody did, and they should be remembered. And if this story sat with you, there is another one waiting. About a woman who returned an envelope of money that was never meant to come back to her, and the door it opened that no one saw coming.